He rapped on my car window just as I was easing into the space, and I was sure it would be a cranky complaint about my parking. Instead, he said something that turned my breathing cold, warmed my heart, and changed the way I think about neighbors, promises, and second chances. Before I begin, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. Atlanta, Phoenix, a small town off Highway 61, or somewhere I've never even heard of. I love knowing where you're listening, because this is a story about a neighborhood, and it might be about yours too. Twilight was falling when I turned onto our street, the kind of lavender blue that makes every porch light look like a small moon. I'd stopped for bread and a rotisserie chicken after work, and the whole set-in smelled like thyme and warm paper bag. My driveway has the meanest angle in the county. Narrow, with a stubborn maple root that pushes the concrete up in a sly little hump, so you have to straighten, pull up, back out, and try again, like negotiating with a mule. My wrists were tired, and my patience was thinner than the steering wheel cover. I slipped the car into reverse, craned my neck over my shoulder, and inched toward the curb. That's when the knock came. 3 firm taps on the glass, not angry, not timid. It made the rotisserie bag crackle, and my heart jumped like I'd hit a pothole. I pressed the brake. My breath fogged a small cloud on the window. When I turned, I saw him, Jack from across the way. Khaki ball cap, faded denim jacket. The kind of face men get after years outdoors, strong lines, and a weather map of sun and wind. He kept one polite step back, hands visible, shoulders turned slightly so he wouldn't loom. I cracked the window 2 inches because we'd only traded yard wave pleasantries since he moved in last winter. "Elaine," he said, my name like a memory he was checking. "Please don't take your foot off the brake. Your car is about to roll." I frowned at him, then down at the console, then at the driveway slope. "I'm in reverse," I said, tapping the shifter with a guilty little laugh. "But thank you." He shook his head, not disagreeing, just steady. I heard the hiss. "Vacuum leak, maybe?" "Listen when you press and release," he said, and made a little motion with his palm, like a conductor cueing a clarinet. I pressed. A thin whisper of air answered from somewhere near my left knee, a sound I'd tuned out for months the way you do a singing refrigerator or a clock that runs a minute fast. My mouth went dry. I'd been nursing the brakes along, promising myself next paycheck, next Saturday, next time. He watched my face soften into that private shape we wear when a worry gets caught. "Can I spot you?" he asked. "Just finish backing in and set your parking brake hard. We'll talk in the driveway where it's safer." There was no command in it, only concern, the kind that knows it's asking for trust. I nodded. He held up one hand, palm toward me, and moved to the curb behind my rear bumper. My shoulders relaxed in that old dance we all know. The neighborly hand signals, the tiny nods, the quiet choreography of people trying not to bump into anything valuable. I eased back, watching his fingers spread when I needed to stop, close when I could move. Once I was in the clear, he pointed to the parking brake with a small authoritative tap. Click. The car settled with a relieved sigh. I cut the engine. The evening air slipped in through the open door. Cut grass, a hint of gasoline from somebody's mower, someone grilling 3 houses down. I stepped out, careful on the small rise where the maple root buckles the concrete. Jack kept that respectful distance again, giving me room to gather my purse and the warm paper bag, to press my remote twice like always. He tipped his head toward the hood. "May I?" he asked. "You're a mechanic?" I said, more defensive than I meant, like he'd caught me with curlers in my hair. Pride is a funny thing at my age, old enough to be sturdy, young enough to forget we still want to be. "Retired," he said. Mostly trucks, mostly before computers bossed us. But a hiss is still a hiss. We stood in the glow of my porch light. The grill down the block crackled. A dog yipped somewhere behind a fence, offended by a squirrel. He didn't reach for the hood latch until I said yes, and even then, he didn't touch a thing without pointing first. There's a kind of courtesy a certain generation of men carry like a pocket knife. Useful, never flashy, always announced. When the hood was up, he listened rather than poked, leaning in with his ear and then stepping back. "Booster," he said finally. "She'll stop, but she'll make you work for it." On a bad slope? He angled his head at the driveway. "That's an argument you don't need to win every day." I felt a slow cold move through me as I imagined all the times I'd nosed into traffic, all the grocery runs, all the church parking lots, and my foot had done more than it should. I was mad at the car, at myself, at the maple root, and the cost of everything. Before the heat behind my eyes could turn to tears, he spoke again, softer. "Elaine, I'm not here to scold you. I came because I've been meaning to for months, and that sound told me I was out of time." "For months?" I asked. I was cautious, ready to bristle at any implication. The porch light hummed. The chicken grease perfumed the cooling air. He took off his cap. Men don't do that much anymore. The gesture made my throat tighten unexpectedly. "I didn't want to bother you. I'm new here. But I recognized your husband's name on the mailbox when I moved in." He glanced toward my porch, toward the brass letters that have been there more than 20 years. "I worked with him at the plant in '98. We weren't friends exactly, different shifts, but we shared a coffee pot and a few stories. When he got sick, he told me something in the break room. Said if I ever crossed paths with you, I was to make sure to say these words: 'You are not alone.'" The bag slipped a little in my arms. The street and its ordinary sounds. The grill, the dog, a TV flickering from a living room window. What quiet in that way sound has when your mind can't find a shelf for a new fact. My husband has been gone 3 years. Grief seasons you, then surprises you anyway. I thought of his big hands and the way he signed his notes with a capital J for jokes he thought were funnier than they were. I thought of the plant, the clank and roar he used to come home smelling of. And I thought of Jack, standing without moving, letting me set the pace of the moment. "You knew him," I said. It came out small, not a question so much as a reaching hand. "I did," he said. "And I'm sorry I waited. Men like me, we tell ourselves we're minding our business when we're really hiding behind it." His words shocked me more than his knock had, not because of a secret, no scandal, no confession that would set tongues wagging, but because I had grown used to silence, to people waving from a distance and assuming a widow needed privacy more than she needed a simple sentence. "You are not alone." It was like a bolt turned in a door I hadn't noticed was locked. "Would you?" I started, then faltered, looking at the bag. "Chicken?" He smiled, slow and kind. "If you'll let me carry it," he said. "And I can show you an easy home test for the booster so you can hear it for yourself when you're not scared of rolling into my azaleas." I laughed, a real one. "Deal," I said and handed over the bag. I unlocked the front door, the deadbolt clicking in the comfortable rhythm I've made 1,000 times. Inside, the house held the day's warmth, the way houses do when they're waiting. I flicked on the kitchen light, the one that makes the counters look almost new. He set the chicken on the table and stayed near the doorway, like an old movie gentleman who knows the edges of a room. "Water?" I asked. "Please," he said. "I'd say coffee, but it's too late for me if I want to sleep." We sat with paper plates and 2 forks. I pulled the chicken apart with my fingers, steam puffing into the air. He thanked me for the drumstick like it was a gift. We ate in those companionable silences that never feel awkward when people share a purpose. The hiss of the booster visited my head like a tape left running. I told him about the sway in the driveway and the way the maple root trips me when I'm not thinking. He told me about fixing school buses long enough to memorize every rattle a rowdy 7th grader can cause. He smiled at my groan when I mentioned the cost of parts, then surprised me again. I can get the part at cost through a friend, he said. But that's not why I came over. I came because of the other thing. The words. I kept thinking about the day I don't knock and the day you need help, and what it would feel like to be a man who had a sentence in his pocket and never used it. I set my fork down. Something about the phrase, a sentence in his pocket, made me see my husband in his lunchroom, tapping his cup, planning the small ways to take care of me after he couldn't. Love looks different at our age. It looks like someone remembering your preferred coffee creamer. It looks like a neighbor standing 3 feet back from your doorway so you don't feel crowded. It looks like truth delivered carefully. You did the right thing, I said. And guess, please, help with the part if you can. I'll pay you back, every penny. We'll fuss about that later, he said, smiling. For now, promise me you won't drive far until we fix it. Groceries, church if you must, but no highway. I promise, I said, saying it felt like placing my hand on a worn wooden rail. Steadying, human. I surprised myself by adding, would you be willing to show me the test tonight, before it gets fully dark? I'd feel better if I knew exactly what I'm listening for. He was on his feet with a nod. Of course. We'll do it slow. Back in the driveway, the last light clung to the undersides of the clouds. He had me sit in the driver's seat with the engine off while he knelt, not touching anything, and asked me to press and release the pedal in a certain rhythm, to notice the firmness, to hear the whisper. He showed me how, with the engine on, the change should be immediate when the booster does its job, and how mine lagged, asking my leg for more than it should. He never reached across me. He never turned a dial without mentioning it first. Every instruction came like the good ones do, calm, patient, letting me be the one who understood by the end. When we were finished, he stepped back and let me close the hood. A moth orbited the porch light. The dog behind the fence had settled into snuffling. Someone down the block laughed, a high, clean sound that made the whole street feel friendly. I looked at Jack and felt that peculiar gratitude that's heavier than relief. It was gratitude with a spine. Thank you, I said, for the breaks, for the sentence, for not letting me roll into your azaleas. They're tough, he said, but people aren't. We're allowed to look after each other. He hesitated, then added, if you ever need a ride while we sort this out, I'm around. Mornings I walk, afternoons I read. Nights I fall asleep in my chair like a cliché. It would be good for me to have a reason to be on time for something. I could hear the carefulness in the offer, the way he built guardrails in the phrasing, so I could say no without bruising either of us. I didn't want to say no. I also didn't want to rush headfirst into anything I couldn't name yet. Grief had taught me that naming can wait until the heart catches up. How about this, I said. Tomorrow, if you're free, you can take me to the parts store. I'll buy the booster, you can nod wisely at whatever the clerk says, and then we'll see about bribing my nephew to crawl under the car if you tell him exactly what to do. He thinks he knows everything, so he'll listen closely to anyone who actually does. Jack laughed, eyes crinkling. Deal, he said. I'm good at nodding wisely. Comes with the hat. We shook hands. Not quick, not lingering, just a handshake you feel in your shoulder afterward because it included the whole person. When I went back inside and leaned against the closed door, I realized I was smiling in a way I hadn't in a long time. A smile that warmed me from the inside out instead of stretching my mouth for other people. I turned off the porch light and set the chicken bones to simmer for stock, because that's what I do when I need to steady myself. I make something that turns time into comfort. Later, sitting at the kitchen table with the house quiet around me, I'd replayed the evening like a song on repeat. 3 taps on the glass. The hiss I finally heard. The sentence carried across decades. You are not alone. I thought of men my age and older, the ones who fix things and apologize for caring as if kindness needs a permission slip. I thought of how easy it is to live on parallel tracks in the same neighborhood, waving from driveways, and never learning the history that runs under our feet like pipes and cables. In the morning, I told myself, we would go to the parts store. He'd wear the cap. I'd bring a list. We'd make a plan. But before any of that, I knew something else had shifted, something that had nothing to do with Connors. The knock on my window had been a warning about breaks, yes. It was also an invitation to let someone stand close enough to keep me from rolling where I didn't want to go, and to stand that close for someone else when it was my turn. I rinsed the plates, set them to dry, and turned out the kitchen light. Through the front window, I could see Jack's porch across the street. He'd left his light on, a soft square of gold in the blue. It looked for all the world like a lighthouse in a small harbor, only a few yards of water between us, the evening tide quieting. And I realized I wasn't waiting for courage or permission anymore. I was waiting, simply, for morning. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains in soft stripes, warming the kitchen floor where I stood with my coffee. I'd slept restlessly, replaying Jack's words in my mind. That simple sentence carried across years. You are not alone. It still settled over me like a quilt, unexpected but deeply needed. I thought of my husband's handwriting, the capital J that always leaned too far to the right, and for the first time in a while, the memory didn't ache as sharply. It felt steadier, as though part of him had managed to reach me through another man's voice. At 9 sharp, I heard the crunch of Jack's boots on the gravel. He didn't knock on the door, just waited on the porch with that ball cap in his hand, turning it the way men fidget when they're giving you space. I stepped outside with my keys and a grocery list tucked in my purse, more out of habit than necessity. He gave me a nod, and I locked the door behind me, feeling oddly like I was about to embark on something bigger than a simple trip to the parts store. We drove in his truck, the kind of sturdy old pickup that smelled faintly of pine cleaner and motor oil. The bench seat had a small tear patched neatly with duct tape, and a rosary swung gently from the rearview mirror. He drove slow, careful, the way men do when they aren't trying to impress, but simply to keep you safe. The road stretched out in front of us, autumn leaves skipping across the asphalt like little dancers. I used to come this way every morning, he said, voice low. Back when the plant was running 3 shifts. Your husband liked the early hours, didn't he? I nodded, fingers curling around my purse strap. He always said mornings belonged to men who wanted to get home in time for supper. He'd rather wake at 4 than miss my chicken pot pie. Jack smiled, eyes on the road. That sounds like him. He was quiet, but when he did speak, he meant it. I respected that. At the store, I felt myself shrinking at the thought of car parts, of counters filled with jargon that never stuck in my head. But Jack walked beside me without hurrying, greeting the young clerk with a nod that said he'd been here before. When the boy tried to talk me into extras, Jack leaned close, lowering his voice so only I could hear. You don't need half of what he's naming, just the booster. Stand firm. And I did. For the first time in years, I didn't let the uncertainty rattle me. I bought exactly what I needed and nothing more. On the way back, the box between us on the seat, I felt a small surge of pride, like I'd won something more than a fair price. I'd stood steady, and I wasn't alone while I did it. Back at my driveway, we unloaded. My nephew Thomas showed up not long after, lanky and skeptical, his baseball cap turned backward. He grinned when I introduced him to Jack, clearly relieved to have someone older who actually knew what he was doing. Jack didn't take over. Instead, he crouched beside Thomas, explaining each step as though teaching, his voice patient, never mocking. I watched from the porch, the cool air brushing my face, as the two of them worked together. Youthful hands eager, experienced hands guiding. It struck me then. Sometimes the gift isn't fixing what's broken, but showing someone else how. The afternoon wore on, and by the time the last bolt was tightened, my driveway smelled of rubber and effort, and the car sat there like a creature revived. I pressed the brake, and this time it answered solidly. No hiss, no lag. Relief flooded me so strongly that I laughed out loud, startling myself. Jack smiled, Thomas beamed, and for a moment I felt the edges of my world widen. When Thomas left, promising to call more often, I stood with Jack in the fading light. The maple leaves rustled overhead, scattering across the drive. I turned to him, suddenly aware of how quiet the street was. "You could have just kept walking yesterday," I said. "Pretended you didn't hear anything. Most people would have." He adjusted his cap, looking out at the horizon. "Maybe once I would have. But I'm too old now to ignore the chances I'm given. Your husband's words weighed on me, Elaine. Carrying them around without using them felt like wasting something important." I swallowed hard, emotion thick in my chest. "Well, you used them, and they mattered." Silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable but full, like a quilt being spread carefully over a bed. I thought about the years since my husband passed, the loneliness disguised as independence, the small victories that felt hollow without someone to share them. I'd grown so used to managing everything alone that I'd almost forgotten the weight of simple companionship. Jack cleared his throat, softer this time. "Listen, I walk every evening. Helps the knees. If you ever want company, just walking, nothing more, I'd be glad to have it. But only if you want." It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even really an invitation. It was an open door, propped wide enough for me to see the choice was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I wanted to step through. That night, after he'd gone, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, watching the light glow in his window across the street. His words echoed in me, not just his, but my husband's carried through him. "You are not alone." They blended until I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. And I understood something I hadn't before, that love doesn't always end when someone leaves. Sometimes it takes on new forms, handed carefully from one person to another, like a torch that keeps the dark at bay. The knock on my car window had startled me, yes. But the words that followed, they woke something I thought was gone. I felt it now, steady and sure, like brakes firm under my foot. I was not alone, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to start living as though that were true.